Hello, everyone. Good evening and good morning to those joining us from New York. And welcome to Girl Up India's monthly feminist meetup, the Sexual Assault Awareness Edition. I am Aditi Arora, the country representative for Girl Up here in India. We're a movement to advance girls' skills, rights, and opportunities to be leaders. Every month, we endeavor to create safe spaces to talk about pressing issues. April is the Sexual Assault Awareness Month, which is an annual campaign to raise public awareness about sexual assault and educate communities and individuals on how to prevent sexual violence. I'm extremely happy to share that we have two amazing feminists who have joined us today to talk about this issue. Dr. Shruti Kapoor, who is joining us from New York, is an Indian economist, women's rights activist, and social entrepreneur. She is the founder of Safety, an organization that aims to educate and empower women and girls to protect themselves from violence. Shruti was named by Apolitical as one of the most influential people in global policy in 2019. The Indian Ministry of Women and Child Development in 2019 honored Dr. Kapoor as one of the 30 #Web Wonder Women. In 2018, Richtopia named her as one of the top 100 leaders from multilateral global organizations. Welcome, Shruti. We are so grateful to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Aditi. Extremely honored to be here.
Thank you. We also have Ms. Kirthi Jayakumar with us today. Kirthi is a women's rights activist, a social entrepreneur, a peace activist. She is also an artist, lawyer, and writer. That's a lot. She is a Commonwealth Scholar, a Vital Voices Lead Fellow, a Local Pathways Fellow, and a World Pulse Impact Leader. Kirthi is also a fellow at the Royal Society of Arts. Welcome, Kirthi. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Aditi. It's such a pleasure to do this with you and with Shruti.
Perfect. All right, before we begin, I would like to reiterate that during the course of this webinar, some words can be triggering for survivors. At any point in time, if you feel uncomfortable or if you feel anxious, please feel free to step away from your system and do a quick grounding exercise. I suggest a couple, and one is place one hand over the crown of your head and close your eyes to avoid distractions. Focus on your breath. And you can do this for up to a minute. The second one is sitting or standing. You can do this anywhere. You place all of your awareness on the bottom of your feet. Pay attention to any sensations. You can do this for up to a minute again. Do this as many times as need to be during the course of this webinar. You can also ask any questions in the question box below, and our panelists will take it up at the end of our discussion. I'm going to start. Kirthi, and could you please briefly tell us a little more about yourself?
Sure. So I live in Chennai, city in South India, and I founded and run the Gender Security Project, which is about a year old now. We work at 3 levels, looking at research, advocacy, and training around expanding the meaning and implications of gender at the institutional level. Now, before this, I founded and ran a nonprofit called the Red Elephant Foundation between 2013 and 2020. I retired it only in January. That used to work exclusively the cross-section of peace building and gender, but from a different angle. We used to work at the community level with the last mile. We used to educate children and communities that work closely with children. So the shift primarily happened because the strategy we started with spoke to a world order that is very different from what we're with right now. And when we started in Chennai, we were, I think, one of 3 organizations. And now I think there are more than I can count in the city. So it felt necessary to speak to structure, to speak to institutions which did not catch up with the change that community has gone through and community is still going through. So that's where I'm at right now. One other thing is that I also coded a mobile app for survivors of gender-based violence called Sahas, which works to support survivors and bystanders across 196 countries. That's a little bit about me.
Just about the world.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Just a little.
uh, Shruti, why don't you tell us a little bit about us, about yourself to us?
Thank you, Aditi, and thank you, Kirti. So hi, everybody. I'm Shruti Kapoor. I live in New York. I have been in the US for almost 20 years now. I moved here for higher education right after I graduated with a bachelor's in Bombay. I grew up in India. And I, right after the Nirbhaya rape case, like most of you and a lot of women and girls were deeply shaken and impacted. I too was, and I decided to start my organization, Safety, with the hope and the aim that we will be able to educate women and girls about conversations around gender-based violence. So growing up, in my household, there was not a lot of talk about um, how to stay safe, what are the various forms of violence. The conversations are more around, don't go out at this hour in the night, or don't wear this, or my father will protect me, or my brother will keep me safe. But it was never about empowering me as a girl with information and rights on how I can, educate myself and keep myself safe. And so that was one of the main reasons why I started Safety, was because I felt there was not a lot of conversations happening in our society, in our homes. And that is our goal at Safety, to educate and empower women and girls against gender-based violence. We do that both through online and offline initiatives. In the offline space, we work with schools, colleges, we work with young children talking about safe, unsafe touch and gender training workshops. We also advocate for self-defense because we feel that it's a way to empower yourself and know a skill that will always help. And then in the online space, we're very active in advocacy work, raising awareness, talking about the different forms of violence and what we as a community can do to come together to address, this pandemic, which has been existing for decades now in our society.
Sorry, yes, this is really interesting because the discourse is still the same pretty much. When I was growing up, my parents, they still, they tell me, if I go out late in the night, they ask me to send them a message, or like just tell someone, or if I am, in an Uber, to share my ride. And it's always about actions that I have to take.
Yeah.
And it's never about empowering me as a person. And that hits close. So let's talk about the current situation that the world is in. We've been seeing this horrifying surge in the number of cases of violence against women and girls. And you talked about it as a pandemic. Yes, UN Women has termed this as a shadow pandemic. So Shruti, could you tell us, could I get your thoughts on this?
Sure. So I think one thing for all of us to remember is even before the COVID pandemic, violence against women has existed in our society, like I said, for decades. And it is really a form of pandemic that we knowingly or unknowingly have been ignoring for a really long time, right? According to the WHO, 1 in 3 women will be sexually assaulted during the course of their lifetime. If you look at that in the context of India, we're about 7.5 billion people, half of which are women. And if we're talking about 1 in 3, we're literally talking about 1 billion women and girls who might, during the course of their lifetime get affected. And so this problem has always existed in our society, in the society around the world. Now, what has happened because of the lockdown is, countries, people have been forced to stay in their homes. Which means that many women and girls are now being trapped. Home is no longer a safe space for them, which we take for granted. A lot of us take for granted. And these women and girls are trapped with their abusers in the home. They do not have access to go out. They do not have access to resources, people, and services, which they normally would have if they wanted to reach out to. Because of this pandemic, our health system is under a lot of stress. which means if you are a victim of domestic violence and you need immediate attention or help, it might take longer for you to get that help because of the problems, because of, you know, how lacking in resources our hospitals are in terms of taking care of. Right now, all the attention is focused on COVID patients, right? A lot of domestic violence shelters are now having to work from home. So they are working in limited capacity in terms of services that they are providing out to victims and survivors. And so we are seeing a situation where these number of cases are surging, you know, because now men are, you know, in situations where some of them are losing employment, some of them are seeing cuts in salary, they're unable to go out, other forms of recreation, you know, men usually resort to sports and other activities. Now they're all, you know, at home, you know, and we're all under highly stressful conditions, because of which we are seeing, you know, surge in already something that existed in our society, domestic violence and violence being used as a form of control, right? And so it is really no surprise, and it's really unfortunate that we are seeing this across the world. It's not only just India. What started off in China, you know, we then saw it in Europe, in various countries in Europe, and now we are seeing almost 100% increase in domestic violence cases in India.
Thank you for that, Shruti. Kirthi, can I get your thoughts on this, please?
So before I answer, I'm going to ask you a question, Aditi, Shruti, if you're also up to answering. So the COVID-19 has been declared a pandemic, right? Yeah?
Yes.
So it's a disease, right? And
Absolutely.
it's a disease that we don't have a cure for. We don't have a vaccine yet, a cure and vaccine yet, right? And we don't know who's spreading it. We don't know who's carrying it. And we don't know what an asymptomatic person could possibly be carrying in them. Yeah. All true. Now let's take that term there, pandemic, and look at what it's described. And then let's think about gender-based violence or violence against women. And can we compare the factors involved in both? Can we truly call it a pandemic and a shadow pandemic at that? I have a huge problem with that term because it just feels like patriarchy downplaying the problem once again. What is a shadow report? Not the original one. It's the secondary one. It's not a concern. Yeah. You call it a pandemic when you say you're helpless about the situation. Are you telling me that a situation that has existed and predated this, that you have refused to find a solution for? Nothing that isn't. There is, which is why people like us are working where we are. But you refuse to see it. And then you throw a helpless word at me and expect me to say that it's cool, I understand, I'm going to back off. Now that is being weaponized beautifully against women's bodies, against trans bodies, against non-binary people's bodies in ways that work counterproductively to them. Now, I completely agree with everything Shruti said in terms of resources being stretched out, right? Mm. But there is, along with resource, such a thing as political will to deploy more resources. And where does political will draw the line? Like, oh, I can't do anything about this. Sorry, boss, you take your complaints anywhere. And I've seen a lot of survivors who come to me and say, police said things like, "ये तो आपस में होता है, पति पत्नी के बीच में होता है, तुम लोग ना कुछ करो अपने बीच में, आप लोग समाधान कर लो." So how do you work with something like that? They have just said, "Not my problem, boss. I'm not going to clean that up." So I have a huge problem with the terminology, and I think it's necessary to address this as an issue that we have to, as a community, address because our governments have failed us. And this whole thing about looking at COVID-19 and responses to COVID-19 on a war footing is equally problematic because we can't militarize our response to things. We militarize women's, our actions and our policies towards women's bodies, and we politicize that and weaponize that against them. And if we're going to casually say, yes, we need to go on war footing, then let's not be selective about it. Bring in Resolution 1325 under the Women, Peace and Security agenda and protect women from sexual violence. You have that commitment. So you can't cherry pick things and give us words like this and wash your hands off government, whichever one of you are listening.
Whichever one of you are listening.
Oh, that's really interesting. It's an interesting take on the word shadow pandemic, and I never thought of it in that sense. So then we all agree that violence against women is increasing in this time. But I was reading this report by, I think it was in the Hindu, which said that Indian police is reporting that cases of rape have reduced by 75%. You know, how can you explain this then? Shruti, do you want to give us your give us your point of view on this?
You know, let's first understand that under normal circumstances, when women face any form of violence, it's so hard for them to come out and report, because in a majority of cases, the perpetrator is always known to the woman or the girl, right? It's usually somebody from the family or a friend. And so to be able to convince them that, okay, go report your dad or go report your uncle in the first place is so hard. Now, this claim that the police is making that the number of rape cases have gone down by 75% might just be the fact that, under this lockdown, women and girls don't have access. So something which was already so hard to do in the first place, we know that only 40% of the women actually go out and report. And out of, if you have the courage and if you are convinced that this is something that you want to report, only 10% really make it to the police station to actually file an FIR, right? So now think of it in a situation where you're in a lockdown, you don't have a safe access to maybe your phone or other resources. How are these women even getting to report anything? They are, they are locked down with their abusers. They're probably under a lot of stress and fear. They don't know what to do in these situations. And so it might just be the case that um, I hate to use the word victims, but women who are being faced with abuse are unable to even get to a position where they can report, and that's why we are seeing a drop in the number of reporting. So things have, during this lockdown, I would just say things have become even more difficult and more exasperated for a lot of women. If under normal circumstances you were finding it so hard to report, how is it that now you can even access a safe option to go and report, right? So it might just be the case that we are seeing so much underreporting because women and girls are unable to get to the right space and get the help that they actually need. They might not even have access to a phone. They might not even know how to reach out to helplines or how to call the police or even a friend, for a matter of fact, right? And so I really refute this claim that rape cases are down, because we really don't know what the reality is in this situation right now. And we have no data. It's only been 6-7 weeks right now. And to say that, I know in a lot of countries, the helpline numbers they've seen a drop in calls, because again, victims are not able to reach out to helplines. But in some countries, there's also been a surge in the number of calls. For example, in Scotland, it's gone up by 30%. Right? Helplines have seen the surge. So it really depends on situation to situation whether or not the person is able to reach out for help or not.
Great, that explains a lot. So the fact is that we're all sitting at home. None of us can go out, access resources. So how can I, or or someone else, help a friend or a family that might be stuck with an abusive partner, Shruti?
Yeah, so I have a few suggestions that you as a friend or family can do. These are 5 points that I wrote down, which I just want to reiterate. So the first thing that you can do as a person is you can connect with your loved ones or your friends and ask them how they would like to stay connected. Again, remember, we have a phone. This phone is safe for us to use. Not a lot of women and girls have access to their phones anymore. So try and understand what is a safe way for them to connect. Use creative ways to connect with your friends and family who might be in an abusive situation. So for example, there are a lot of online games now which have a chat feature which you can use to connect with each other, and still use some code words and language to ask if your friend or family is safe in their house, right? So one is establish that safe connection. Once you establish that safe connection, find creative ways to stay in touch. If I have a child and my friend who I know might be in an abusive situation also have children, I might say, hey, let's get together, let's get the children together on FaceTime and let's talk. That's one creative way of connecting, rather than saying, let's just get on the phone and let me ask you how you're doing in your home, right? The third thing is be supportive and believe. When a survivor tells you that they are being abused, believe them. Some things you might say to them are, you're not alone in this, I care for you, I believe you. These are words that many people want to hear, and it helps them hearing these words. So believe them. The fourth thing that you can do is, on behalf of your friend or family, you can find a helpline number that they might not be able to get to. Have that handy. You can find a local domestic violence shelter, which again, these are information and things you can pass on to them. They might not have access to the internet. They might not have access to a phone. And the fifth thing is, at some point, once you've been able to establish a safe connection, figure out a exit plan, figure out a safety plan with them. Identify what are the dangers in your house currently. Have these conversations with them. Just staying in touch with your friends and family during this lockdown can help in big ways. A lot of us are going through various forms. It might be mental abuse, it might be emotional, at an emotional level, right? Then just staying in touch with your friends, making sure, just touching base every day and saying, hey, how are you doing? Are you feeling okay? Might be of a big help. And we don't really have to move mountains, but just staying in touch with our family and friends can make a big difference.
That is really interesting and such nice ways. And I love the point that, there are so many games where there is a chat feature. I was playing Ludo with a friend of mine in the morning. And I was using the chat feature just to irritate her, but it can be used in creative ways. And that's so interesting. Kirthi, could I get your opinion on this, please?
Sure. So I really love the ideas that you shared, Shruti. They were really, really well thought of and well articulated. But what I also see here, at least in the South, so we're now in a very intensive lockdown. Only medical stores are open, with I think restaurants with select times. So any civilian movement outside is almost completely stopped, right? So in this time, what we've been experiencing is people who don't have access to phones are struggling, right? A lot of the migrant labor that have remained back, that are staying in makeshift houses or really tiny spaces. A lot of domestic helps. Now, a lot of them remain in houses where they were originally the lone breadwinners to start with. And their husbands were alcoholics. Now with the lockdown, there's no access to alcohol. So there is that level of frustration as well, with the lack of monetary gain in any sense. Now they are facing brutal violence in ways that we possibly can't even imagine. Their everyday life is complicated. So down in the grassroots, now like this, beyond like say our friend circles, at the grassroots, factors like caste, class, ability of persons with disability, these things, marginalization play a huge role, right? So what we've been trying to do is to identify people who are up and about. So who's that? Delivery partners, delivery agents, the police, and civic commissioners. So what we've asked for them to do is to communicate with the women where the vulnerability is extremely high, and tell them, if you're facing violence, tie a white cloth outside your window, or leave a white cloth hanging outside your door. Now that is so innocuous, nobody's going to notice. It's like me going to hang clothes out to dry. Now you're not going to worry if a kacha is hanging outside my door. It's not like that. Is your property even. If it was, you will be sharing the load, you're not. So whatever. So that has immediately been able to pick the curiosity of a bystander. If that's a police personnel who's patrolling the street, to walk in, to get the woman out. And there've been some amazing shelters that have supported. The other thing we've done is every day the situation changes, right? Like today a restaurant is open, tomorrow it's not. In the same way, today a medical store is open, tomorrow it's not. So the same way a domestic violence control room is open and it is also not. So what we've done is we've tried to get hyper-local about things, like what offices used to exist at one point that are now closed, which can double up as a shelter. Now, we don't need high funda shelters. We're not looking at like housing a person in a 5-star hotel, like a functional space that is breathable, airable, where people can deliver and drop off food and groceries, a basic toilet that's functional, that can develop beautifully. And it's amazing how many people have stepped up, because one thing that is common in Chennai is residential flats have also been used as offices. So like that one floor will be an office for some people, right? So those kind of offices have been so generous. They've opened up spaces to get their domestic help in to stay there with their kids. And because it's curfew, the husband cannot come charging and hunt them down. If they do, to be behind bars, right? Another really amazing strategy is what I think was seen in Pune, where the police started institutionally quarantining the abuser. So that put the fear of God in them, because if they were amidst potential COVID patients or were housed for a COVID test,
you're done.
Exactly. And I mean, it's a solution. It's not a long-term solution. It's not a shift in mindset. The violence will come back once this fear goes, but it is working for now. And there are people like us who are going to work beyond this to make sure that the shift in mindset happens. But in larger ways of thinking, I think this pandemic has forced us to think of how structural violence has just gone abated, because it served patriarchy beautifully. There is absolutely nobody that is benefiting from this reality that's challenging all of us now. And yet there are so many more of us that are at greater disadvantage, even among those that are at a disadvantage. And that gap is widening every day, whether that's the migrant workers who are hosed down with DDT or chlorine, or it is the woman who's holed up inside a house with an abusive set of parents against whom a conversation is not possible. So yeah.
That's really interesting take on this, Kirthi. Thank you for sharing your views. I just wanted to talk about how, you know, all of these terms, and we're talking about sexual assault, and we talk about sexual violence, we talk about abuse, we talk about rape, and they're tossed around. And I just wanted to understand, can these terms be used interchangeably? Could you help us understand the difference between them?
Sure. So first of all, it is absolutely, I mean, it's everyday practice for people to use them interchangeably, right? So the idea of violence against women being conflated with gender-based violence is actually a misinformed idea, because woman and gender are not synonymous. Gender is a spectrum that goes beyond the binary of male and female and includes a range of identities that we still don't have a grip over. Sex is also not a binary. It is beyond just masculine, male and female, and ascribed male at birth and female at birth, and also falls under a spectrum. So any violence that targets the sex identity of an individual, right? Whether that's feticide, because aborting a baby because it's a girl, or it presents as a girl in terms of the organs. That is sexual violence, that's sex-based violence. Violence that targets a person's self-identified gender orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and gender performance is gender-based violence. Now, in many instances, we find that the conflation of sex and gender works, which is what speaks to cis-het bodies, right? Bodies that are born and ascribed with a certain sex and grow up to identify with the gender performance ascribed to that particular identity. So then what would you speak about, would you say of people whose gender identities don't conform with their bodies? We as a society tend to animalize them. We've gone on a historical trajectory of making sure that these bodies don't form within the binary. So that entirely remains a subset that is ignored when we talk about gender-based violence. And then you have sexualized violence, which is any form of violence that is weaponized for a sexual reason. Like for instance, if you look at acid attacks, by the nature of itself, it's not a sexual crime. It's not affecting one's sexual and reproductive health. It is acid thrown on a woman, or in some instances, acid thrown on a man, in some instances, on a non-binary person. But you see what is being targeted there, that determines that the violence is sexualized in that context. So why these terms matter? In some cases, it works if you just want to get the point across and your audience knows what you're talking about. But these things matter, number one, for something as basic as giving them exactly what they need. What is the kind of psychosocial support you need? If you're going to conflate gender-based violence and violence against women, and you find, say, a non-binary person who appears to present as a woman, receiving psychosocial help, if that help is not queer affirmative, it is just going to destroy any semblance of them receiving that psychosocial support. So the key is to be very mindful of what an individual's self-determined identity is. Something as basic as asking a person their pronouns and then asking them to talk about what happened to them. That establishes agency. And the biggest deal is, like Shruti spoke about, violence is a means of controlling a person. And when violence happens, your control was lost in that situation. And if you take 2 minutes to ask them the question, you situate that control right back in their hands. And that's agency being respected there for you.
Wow, Kirthi, I never thought about all of this in such detail, and I'm sure our audiences have never, thought about all of this. And it's so nice to have you here and explain this. Kirthi and Shruti, both of you, your organizations curate and amplify stories of survivors. They amplify stories of inspirational, resilient individuals. Do you see storytelling as a cathartic tool to relieve community and individual traumas? I'll go with Shruti first, and then Kirthi, you can answer.
Absolutely. I think we at Safety believe that all of us want to be heard, right? What is one of our main, everybody, if you think of everybody, all of us, we have stories, and we always want to be heard and we want to be seen. And I think storytelling allows each one of us to do that. Now, there are various ways in which you can tell your stories. Some people like to write, some people are using social media platforms to share their stories. Other people like to use art. So there are various ways in which you can tell your stories, but the underlying goal of all these stories is to say, hey, I want to be heard, I want to be seen, and I want to be acknowledged. And I feel, so we feel that storytelling has a lot of power. It not only allows us to share our stories, but it also in some ways encourages other people to share theirs if they've been inspired by our stories. It allows people and organizations to connect, based on our stories. And so we at Safety, there are two things that we actively do. We have a program called Speak Our Stories. This is a program that I started with a friend of mine, Rachel Thompson, for survivors of sexual assault to come out and share their stories anonymously or not. And again, the whole idea was to share your story from a healing perspective, but also to connect with other survivors, share resources, community resources that might have helped you in your healing process with everybody. And so that is one program that we have started. We anonymously or not collect stories, and with their permission, we share it on our platform. And we have found that to be a great source of inspiration for many people. Another thing that, in last December, we came out with the Safety Survivors Toolkit. And as part of our research for this toolkit, we interviewed many survivors across the world, and they have been able to share their stories and their experiences, working with professionals in this space. So their experience working with the police or not, if they decide to report a crime, why is it that they decided to go with it, and what was their experience? Or if they decide to seek professional help in the form of a psychotherapist, why did they go that route, and what was their experience? So this also has been, the toolkit has been a great way for us to share stories of survivors. And so we definitely believe that storytelling is a wonderful way of not only sharing our stories, but also connecting people for a common goal and cause.
And I remember last December, I was at the launch of the toolkit in Delhi, and
Yes.
I've been through the toolkit, and I congratulate you. It's such a beautiful piece of work, and it's so comprehensive.
Thank
Yes,
you.
yes.
Thank you. And we were very fortunate to partner with Kirthi for the legal section. She's such an expert and such a brilliant person on this issue. So just for everybody, if you haven't checked out the toolkit, this is available on our website. You can download the PDF. And if you have any questions about this, want to reach out, please feel free to do that.
Yes, and Kirthi, do you want to add to your part of the, if storytelling helps your organization in?
Sure. Thank you for that question, and also thank you, Shruti, for sharing what you do. I just want to start by saying that I take a tiny deviation, a different route in this, and it is only because the world is full of all kinds of people, right? So each of us speaks to different demographics, and we respond to what comes to us. So storytelling at the Red Elephant Foundation as it existed then was used for the presentation of change makers. In fact, we also profiled Shruti's story. We did share that on the website back then. The idea being for people to just sort of look at various solutions and strategies, right? So we used that direction for the online storytelling. We do not engage with survivor stories in ways that put them up for consumption online for two reasons. One, there is a tendency to engage in what is called inspiration porn. A lot of times people put a lot of pressure on themselves to also feel that if they made that trajectory of change, I must too. And why is it not happening to me? Am I abnormal? Am I not going right? And I need to aspire to a standard to be normal. Now, when that happens and they do this on their own without unpacking it with a therapist for whatever reason, economic reasons, or just not being able to access a therapist, or just personal fears and discomfort, then that's actually leading them down a spiral that is a little dangerous to lead them down, right? So what we do is we work with communities. We do peace education workshops. We continue to do that as the Gender Security Project, where the story is the survivors to tell if they want to, and they say it in whatever way they want. If they want to be part of it as a narration, if they want to do it as spoken word poetry, if they want to do it as playback theater, if they maybe want to just draw a picture or just sit mum, it's entirely up to them as part of that circle. But the major fear that, and this is something that's very personal, because when I put out my story myself, very interesting things started happening online. One is they reduce you to that story. You become that incident that happened to you. And you can't be anything more because that is all you are to them. Or you become a hyper inspiration to them, that they put you on a pedestal, and it hurts because you can't have down days. So there's a danger of a single story, as Chimamanda Adichie says. There is a threat to instrumentalize one story to for whatever reason. And we've seen that happen a lot, like movies, Bollywood, very unthinkingly objectifies women, and at the same time instrumentalizes stories of rape and harassment to sell their stories or their movies. And that is a very dangerous trend, because you can't use it as a plot device without addressing the issues that you are contributing to it to happen in the first place. So I digress, but the point I'm trying to make here is that storytelling is a really great tool. It is a peace building tool for us, and we try to work with it within controlled settings, just so that we can make sure that those whoever tell their stories have a means to get the help they need immediately after.
So I lost you a bit in between because my internet is not very stable right now, but I did get the gist of it. And I find it really interesting that you use the word inspiration porn. I know it was coined by Stella Young in her TEDx, in her talk, right? And I encourage everyone to go hear it. It's quite interesting, you know. I knew about poverty porn. You know, we talk about this all the time when we're in the development sector, but this inspiration porn was something that this term was new to me. But moving on, I'm not sure if you guys can hear me.
We can hear you.
We can go for it.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect, great. So yes, finally, Kirthi, I also wanted to talk to you about your app, your Sahas app, and you've coded it, right? And last I checked, it has helped about 8,000 survivors of sexual violence in 197 countries. Could you tell us a little more about the app, and what is your opinion on using ICT in creating safer cities?
Sure. Thank you so much for asking. So the app actually came about a couple of years ago when I was asleep, and I received a bunch of text messages and WhatsApp calls from a friend who had relocated from Chennai to the UK. Just bear in mind that this girl had never left Chennai all her life, and she was just married off to this guy who she had never met before getting married to Skype calls or something like that, and she was carted off to the UK. Now this still happens, right? There's so many houses where this is the norm, this is expected. And so this girl left home, and for 1.5 years was facing the worst kind of abuse she had ever faced in her life, right? Physical abuse, emotional abuse, deprivation. She was not allowed to leave the house. Her husband would lock her up. And a point came where it was just so difficult for her to have even a normal conversation with her parents, because he was always milling around. He had spyware on her phone, spyware on her devices, so she couldn't open up and tell anyone. So on the night that I got these calls and messages from her, she had managed to get out of the house because he forgot to lock it when he stepped out. So she left, she went to the closest railway station, which was the only route she remembered, because that's how they would go to buy groceries every Sunday. So she's gone on this train with whatever money she has on her Oyster card. She's sat there just going to nowhere, and she looked like she was in distress. So a kindly old lady has seen her and has reached out to her. Now she couldn't call her parents because it was, I think, roughly like somewhere around midnight in India, and calling her parents who were aged at the time was not a thought in her mind at the time, right? So she managed to get out, she managed to get help, and she was relocated to a shelter from where they got in touch with the embassy and brought her back and all of that. Now, this made me realize that if she wanted to reach out to trusted friends and having none in the UK, having to reach out to someone in India, and if they are not available, how many more are we not helping in this situation, right? Like how many more are going without access? So that put the idea to create a tool using tech. So I started with using an Ushahidi map, which was inspired by Safe City, an organization that maps instances of sexual violence on the street, right? Street harassment, Elsa de Silva's. So the platform was similar, but I also realized it's not going to lend itself to a mobile phone. And when you're running your life with an NGO on a shoestring budget, no, okay, just zero budget, you're not going to get money to do these things. And of course, like who wants to fund things that support women, right? Who does that? So I went to companies. I said, I have this idea for you. How about you code this for me? And then, yeah, we'll do it, but it's a free project. So if we get paid projects, your idea is not important to us. So a point came when I realized that if I want this to be done, I had to trust myself to do it, which was the world's most ridiculous idea because I'm a lawyer. I left science way back in 2002. Whoever's calculating my age stopped. And not having any knowledge of computer science. The last thing I think was C++, and my teacher threatened me to avoid computer science because it was that miserable, all the things I learned and did. So I taught myself to code on Coursera. It was a miserable time. I went to sleep, dreamt of code. I would wake up, you know that meme, right? The woman seeing math formulae in her face, that was me for 1 month. It was a struggle. I pulled out my hair, literally no jokes. A price I paid very heavily for later, but yeah, I managed to put the app together. It was obviously, I mean, it's like, I don't know if you ask me to be MF Hussain, you know what will be the end product, right? That's what it was like to start with. But then I started refining the knowledge and refining the app on the way. And I had such a great team, volunteers around the world through the UN online volunteering system, who came together to help put resources together, to verify those resources, and then to keep triangulating them, because it's an ongoing process. If an NGO doesn't have funding, tomorrow they'll stop offering that program. So you need to be aware of whether that's happening or not. So that's ongoing. Right now, the app, so we don't collect data. We don't know who's downloaded the app. We have obviously the back end of the app, which tells us how many downloads. But what we've also seen is a lot of organizations have come back saying, we found help using this app, and this month we were able to support these many people. So that's the number which we have as of now. But a very difficult thing, I don't know if it's something to be happy about or not happy about, I don't know. But in this time, since the lockdown, since March 24th onwards, at least in India, in my mind, the downloads have increased 7 times. I mean, I'm looking at in 4 digits, the number of downloads of the app. And also another interesting thing that's been happening is the app has been downloaded, deleted, uninstalled, and downloaded again on the same system several times, which means that this is a communal phone. That phone is being checked, the resources being taken, and then it's being deleted. So now it's a very difficult thing to think about, because when I thought of the blueprint of the app, it was to make it an innocuous one. The logo would look like a game. So you won't know that it's an app for survivors, but that's not how the policy works, right? If they're publishing your app, they want you to be transparent. So many things to think about, and it's actually driving a lot of lessons to focus on at the moment. Right now, I'm trying to refine it by learning blockchain technology to see how that can be integrated so that if survivors want to save evidence, because when you put it in blockchain, it's absolutely indefiable, like nobody can tamper with it. So I'm trying to learn that and then struggling. Yeah.
We all know you're going to do an amazing job, Kirthi. So yeah, the word struggling doesn't go for you.
I mean, to be able to come up with this and, you know, code an entire app, even though I want to help, I wouldn't think of doing this, and I would actually pull out my hair, because I hate science and I hate hate maths and I hate all of this. But despite all of this, you persevered, and it's helping so many people. So kudos to you, and keep doing the good work that you're doing. So, a lot of young girls are listening in right now. Shruti, is there something you would like to tell them?
I would just like to say one, thank you for being here today. It's a weekend, it's a Sunday, and the fact that you are amongst all of us means these issues matter to you. You care for them, and so thank you. Thank you for the support. The other thing I like to remind myself, and so I would just like to remind everybody here, is I feel we sitting here are really privileged. We have a safe home. We have a safe space to have these conversations. And so I would really urge all of us, to do whatever it is that we can to help those that don't have these safe spaces, that don't have a safe home. And what that could look like is maybe donating to a cause who is working with the marginalized during these times and providing them food and providing them a safe shelter. What that could look like is just reaching out to your friend and saying hello and checking on them, checking how they are doing in the day-to-day life. What that could look like is raising your voice and awareness using your social media platforms to talk about these issues, to talk about the rising domestic violence cases, to talk about, so I would say, yes, these are very difficult times and they are hard on all of us, but do something that is within your capacity to reach out to a friend, to reach out to another person who might benefit from your help. So again, thank you for being here on a Sunday with all of us. Thank you for using your voices, your platforms in raising awareness. Each one of us has to be in this together to make a difference.
Absolutely. I'm so grateful that so many people came out today. This is the highest participation that we've ever had in any of our meetups, which is great. So Kirthi, do you have any messages for our girls here right now?
Sure. First of all, again, sort of just repeating something Shruti said, but thank you for being here. It matters because even showing up is an act of resistance sometimes, and that you've shown up really matters. This conversation, if it's sowed a seed in you to do something, to get up and just respond to a problem around you, whatever be the problem, I think that's really, success at the end of the day. Just two things that I will share. I don't have cards to give advice, but I can share lessons that I've learned, perhaps lessons that you don't have to waste time making mistakes learning, so you can go out and make a few of your mistakes and come back and teach me. But the first thing is, try as much as you can to collaborate rather than compete. There are a lot of people doing a lot of meaningful work, but the problem is we're working in an ocean against a huge issue that needs as many hands as it can to work together to topple that issue. And it's not going to help if we compete, because we already have limited resources. I mean, Shruti will also attest to this. As an organization, funding is miserable for nonprofits working in this space, because you can't monetize an outcome like gender equality. It's not going to serve a capitalist venture. So it's hard to find resources, and the more you join hands and the more you amplify work that has already been done, you don't necessarily have to add value. You can even be the value of amplifying it. Like, I, for instance, struggle with social anxiety. I find it very difficult to talk about things that I do. And so there are some amazing people like Shruti herself, who's actually given me a shout out on so many occasions, things that I'm not able to do for myself. And so collaboration can look like that. Collaboration can look like tagging a friend on something that seems like a problem that you both think is a problem and work on it together. So look for ways to do that. And the other thing is, there's this concept called Ubuntu, right? I am who I am because of who we are together. We leave absolutely nothing behind when we leave the planet. We're a tiny hyphen between a birth and a death here. And what we do in this hyphen leaves a legacy behind, one that you will be remembered by, whether you like it or not. Make the most of it in ways that you're remembered for the positive thing. If that means just being a nice person, because like Maya Angelou says, people remember how you made them feel. So if it means giving them that encouraging statement, if it means just sending them a message of love when they're going through something difficult, nobody needs to be a savior. Nobody can be a savior. Nobody can decide for another, but be there, be present, and be wholesomely present as much as you can.
I love it. I love it. I love it. It's so positive. And thank you so much, both of you, for joining us today. And we are now going to take some questions from the audience. We have about 10 minutes, and we have about 3 questions. And please feel free to ask questions in the chat in the Q&A box below. I'm going to start with the first one, and it says, since the majority of women experience sexual assault at the hands of someone that they know, is taking precautions on their end really enough? Didn't this go hand in hand with an active change towards the society's mindset of women and a decrease in a rape culture? Shruti, would you want to answer this?
Sure. Tarini, hi. Thank you for that question. I think you put it wonderfully. You put it really well that yes, a majority of women do experience sexual harassment by somebody they already know it. And so it is not just enough to constantly put the onus on women and girls to protect themselves, but what is really required is a huge shift in mindset and how we see violence against women and girls. And this is a conversation that needs to be intergenerational. It's a conversation that needs to be constantly had at home through our educational systems, right? It needs to start very early in life. That means we start talking to children about consent, about respecting each other from a very young age. And it's also upon us to be role models to our children to show this. You know, if a father is showing in his household, if a father is showing a child that he respects the women in the family, that goes a long way, right? So, and as you all probably understand, changing mindsets doesn't happen right away. It won't happen in a week. It takes time. And so it's a conversation that needs to be had constantly. You know, we need to have these conversations constantly. And while unfortunately there's a lot of shame and stigma associated with violence against women and girls and sexual assault, I think it is incumbent upon all of us, and when I say all of us, I mean all genders, not just women and girls, to be those forces and agents of change, right? We need to engage men and boys in these conversations. So yes, this does go hand in hand with an active change in how the society perceives rape culture, how the society perceives the role of women, and how women are considered as as agents of change in the society.
Perfect. That's wonderful. I'm going to follow that up with another question by Aditi, who says, what is your view about sexual assault which happens to men?
Kirthi, do you want to take that up?
Sure. So if I could just respond to that in 2 ways. Number one, sexual assault against anyone is wrong. End of story. It's wrong, it's unacceptable, it is disrespectful and a violation of an individual's personal boundary. End of story. The second thing is patriarchy weaponizes itself against men. A lot of times when we have conversations with men, we always see them as beneficiaries of patriarchy, which is common to most of us. We see them as people who are involved as very active agents in keeping patriarchy alive because it's self-serving. But it is also making monsters out of those men. It makes them bereft of emotions, or at least showing emotions, because showing emotions is seen as emasculation. It is forcing them to constantly be breadwinners, where pursuing something that their gender identity is not acceptably allowed to pursue is seen as an anomaly. Instances of sexual violence cannot be talked about because it's seen as either eroding their masculinity or that they are automatically titled, which is a very, very difficult thing to deal with, we're automatically titled homosexual. So you see, the burden they bear is tremendous. Sexual violence against men and boys is in many ways likely to lead to one of two consequences. One, they become abusers themselves because of what happened, because it's a trauma. Your body responds to traumas in different ways. If they've not had room to unpack it, there's aggression, there's anger, and they could become abusers themselves. And on the other side, the other end of the spectrum, they could lead their lives becoming more victimized by a society because they've not been able to unpack all of the trauma and pain. So it is an absolutely important issue to address. regardless of what culture, regardless of what factors stand behind you. And this kind of, what I'm going to say now also kind of speaks to a question that I think Tarini raised. When we talk of rape culture, it's not just about society. Please understand, it is about the structures that make that society possible. And what are your structures? Everything from your security sector. It's that police officer who says, "Tum wahan kya kar rahi thi jab FIR file kar rahe." It is that Bollywood movie that says, "Arey, usko chedna hai," because that's what she likes. Her no is a yes. It is the CBFC that gives that film a certification. So we have to dismantle structure. It's a terribly slow process because social change has a gestation period of 1 generation, but it is not going to happen unless we start now. So we need to address these things. 100% true.
Great. The Tarini is a high school student, and I find this so interesting that at such a young age they're talking about all of this. It's I feel really proud because I know Tarini, and she's a girl up girl, and it's amazing.
Good on you, Tarini. Good on you.
This question is from Pooja, and she says most families don't enable children with the vocabulary to address abuse. And how do you change that? And I think I'll ask this question to Shruti because she has a daughter, and she's a mother of a very cute young daughter. And
so very rightly identified, Pooja. Pooja here is a wonderful mental health advocate who has been doing an excellent job during this lockdown in educating people on various issues of the pandemic. So coming back to her question, when I was growing up, I was one of those children whose parents never had this conversation. And I am a survivor of child sexual abuse. And because my parents never had these conversations, when I was personally abused, I didn't for a very long time even understand what had happened to me. It was not until, I became an adult that I realized what had happened to me. It was very recently, in fact, 2 months ago, that I publicly came out with my incident and my experience with child sexual abuse. And therefore, since I've been through this personally and I understand what this can do to a person, I have been very actively advocating to teach children from a very young age. And when I say a very young age, I'm talking as young as 3 or 4 years old children. When they start to understand, you can start having these conversations at home in a very simple manner. So for example, like you rightly identified, Aditi, I have a 4-year-old girl, and I have started talking to her about identifying the various parts of her body. So normally we teach children head, shoulders, knees and toes, right? But we never talk about, and pardon my language for the use of this word, we don't talk to them about vagina, we don't talk to them about the word penis. So naming parts is very important from a very young age. Let's not use other words to name these parts. It's important for our children to understand the names of these parts so that they can identify them, they can talk about them. Talk about safe unsafe touch to your children from a very young age. Talk about creating who are in your circle of safety, right? So if somebody touches you inappropriately, what does an inappropriate or an unsafe touch mean? Talk to your children very early on about that. And what does a child do if they experience this touch, right? So in our safe unsafe touch workshops, we talk about the say no go tell strategy. Like if somebody touches you inappropriately, you scream no, you run away from there and you go tell a person from your trusted circle. So these are conversations which are difficult to have. A lot of our parents, I know my parents didn't know how to have this conversation with us. They are awkward conversations, they are based on trust with your child, but it is incumbent upon us as adults also, one, to inform ourselves. If we don't know how to have these conversations, there are plenty of resources available online now that we can use to first educate ourselves and then try and have these conversations with our children. But I think it is extremely important, not just leave it to our educational system to have these conversations, because unfortunately these conversations are not being had in school as much as we like. So take it upon us as parents to start these conversations early and build that trust with your child, so that tomorrow if your child ever comes and says that something like this happened to me, I should be able to say, I'm sorry this happened to you, I believe you, and I will do whatever I can to help you, not dismiss them. So I've been following that as a parent. It's a difficult conversation, but I've been, trying to do my best to have these conversations with my daughter. And I think that's helped me personally as a parent, and I hope it will help her too.
It's fantastic.
May I add something there? Sorry,
Absolutely.
may I add
No,
something?
go ahead.
Thank you. We've worked with communities here in Chennai and in a school in Pakistan around safe and unsafe touch. And very interestingly, I agree and allude 100% to everything Shruti said. But very interestingly, when you tell parents this, you get a ho jayega, we'll do it. Yes, we'll go back home. But for a parent to unlearn it, and very subconsciously, I also noticed it in Shruti. She apologized first for the use of those two words, even though they're just bodily organs. And it's so ingrained. It's not in any way dismissing anything that she said or the value of what she said. It's 100% there. But that's how we are. Even I find myself thinking my voice also goes down when I say penis or when I say vagina. Right now, I'm consciously thinking not to lower that voice, so I'm not. But that's how deeply ingrained it is, right? So I think if you're planning to have a child, start there. Have your conversation around how these things will have to play into your upbringing of your child. Start by shifting your mindset then. If you've had a pregnancy without planning for it, there's still ways for you to prepare before your child becomes old enough to ask you these questions or to know this information. So shift, as a parent, work very hard to shift your own mindset. Normalize the use of these terms by unblocking your own conditioning around it. I think without that, we can't get there. And it's also important as parents, and I'm sure this is a conversation Shruti would have also had, whoever your child is in interaction with, make that parent know that if my child brings up these labels or these words, you will not shut them down. You will not question them for calling a body part what it is. So it's important that we work with the ecosystem as well.
Yeah, great. I mean, great points, Kirti. And you're right, like I said, we first have to work on ourselves to be able to have these conversations, because we from a very young age have been taught that, let's not talk about this. This is, not something we openly discuss. And I grew up with that mentality. So to be able to even use those words now, I try very hard and be very open with my daughter. And, we had a conversation with my husband and he was like, she's only 3 years old or 4-year-old. Why introduce these words to her? But you know what? We have to. And we have to bring that shift within ourselves to be able to do that. So yes, thank you for bringing that up, Kirti.
I agree. In fact, we have to consciously unlearn a lot of things that are, I never talk about all of these things to anybody. It's shrouded in mystery. It's shrouded in shame, and we don't talk about it. But it's really important to break that taboo and start talking about it. I'm going to take 2 last questions, and then I think we're already 5 minutes over our time limit, but I think we can take 2 more questions. The first one's from Simran. Simran says that she works with kids very often that are suffering through sexual abuse at home and cannot leave their current situation because of economic and social constraints. So in that situation, what do you think is the best way to protect a child if you can't take them away from their abuser? And I'm going to direct that to Shruti again.
I would say let's ask Kirti, because I think she has a little bit more experience working on the ground in this, and I think she'll be able to educate us better than probably I can on this subject.
Perfect.
This is an extremely difficult reality because when you know that that's the child's home, you can't take the child out of home, right? Because that would mean that you are going against the law. If a child has a home and a child has an established family, the law expects that that child remains with their family. So we actually had a case like this. It was at a corporation school in Chennai, and the child was being abused by her father and her uncles. So we're looking at multiple abusers in a day. And it was absolutely, it was devastating because the child was just half her potential. She could be so much, but it was too much to even see what she had been reduced to. So we started working with the mother. We started engaging the mother, letting her know that what was happening with the child was wrong. And so we worked in two things with the mother. The first thing we did was we said, we will engage your child until 7 p.m. at school through extra classes. So what we did was we paid for the child to go to a dance class. We paid for the child to sit in the dance class for the rest of the day and play or do whatever she wanted. She was not going to put herself through another learning. She was not going to be, labored because she was out of home. She could sleep. She was safe. The dance teacher was a very, very good friend of mine, has done a lot of work around dance movement therapy, very supportive of children through her work. So she started putting the child through dance movement therapy. Aditi, this is something you yourself do, and started helping the child unpack her trauma. Now, by the time the child went home at 7 p.m., because she's unpacked her trauma, and if you hit the nail on the head right, you begin to feel sleepy if you've shifted something when your healing has begun. So the child would go back home feeling sleepy. And what did sleepy mean? Be with mama, sleep with mom. So what we started doing was to try to delay and put something in between the incident from occurring and the child itself. Once we started doing that, the mother started seeing that the child was beginning to do better, was beginning to respond, was really just benefiting from the fact that that abuse was not happening. And then we had a conversation with her about possibly leaving her husband if that's something she wanted to do. We made options available for her in terms of what she could do in, say, monetarily or economically. Now, this is an ideal case scenario. This is ideal because, one, it came to our notice. It came to our notice and we were able to do something. There are many situations where neither is happening. So the key is to be vigilant. If you see something happening, if you can intervene. It's very time consuming. This did not happen in a day. This did not happen in a week. It was 6 months. But it is slow. It is as sure as it can get. The key is to go back to something Shruti beautifully put, which is to be creative. What is your situation there? What can you work with? And how best can you make that reality change from point A to point B? How can you be that catalyst? Figure it out there.
And may I also just add that, we all can play a role here. Some of us have kids at home, some of us don't have kids at home, but we are surrounded by kids, right? And so I always tell people, keep your eyes, ears open, observe. If you see something is off, please use it as a red flag and try and reach out for help. So it's not just only sometimes the parents are so caught up in their day to day and parenting that they are ignoring the child. They are not catching on to these signals. And so if you see something, then maybe you can alert them, maybe you can alert the right authorities and seek out for the help that that child needs. So I would encourage everybody to also think, on those terms, and not just think that it's not my responsibility or my role to step in here.
Yeah, true. Fantastic. And I'm just going to take one last question and then we're done. So what are your views on the death penalty for sexual offenders? And this is extremely controversial.
A favorite question.
Yes.
I'm just quickly going to, share my opinion on this. Well, I know a lot of people were very, very happy with the death penalty in the case of Nirbhaya's case. At an emotional level, I too for a second felt, yes, they deserve this and they got what they deserve. They don't, finally justice was met. On a more practical level, and somebody who works in this space, the death penalty will really not do anything to change the ground reality. It is not a long-term solution, right? It is, in my opinion, a short-term solution that the government, the courts came up with in some sense to really pacify the society and their anger and their expectation. Will it change anything on the ground in terms of women and girls' safety? Probably not. There have been several studies that have been done in the past to show that death penalty does not deter crimes against women and girls, that they do not deter criminals. The reason why rapes happen is, it's because it's a power play. It's about control, right? And by giving death penalty to the perpetrators, we are not changing those underlying reasons why these violences are happening. So yes, while at an emotional level we might all feel like, justice has been served, but practically things will not change unless we bring structural changes within our society to address this deep-rooted issue. And that means, like investing in infrastructure, investing in lighting, gender sensitizing police, and the people who work in this space, men who work in this space, fixing our educational system to have these conversations. So that's my 2 cents on this.
Perfect. Kirthi, can I have your last words on this?
Sure. So as a law student, one of the things that I never understood was the death penalty, and for largely the reasons that Shruti shared. But interestingly, I came across a concept called restorative justice, right? Which is, if I am wronged, I want to be the one to decide how I will be righted. And for a community of people, the death penalty is not an instrument of social change. The death penalty is not an instrument of long-lasting, sustainable shifts in mindsets. It's a band-aid, yeah? But if that band-aid fits your injury, and you were the one that was wronged, and you want that for the criminal, you have a say. Which means where I'm able to empathize with the girl's mother and her father and their need for that death penalty to avenge their daughter's passing, I'm also equally cognitive of the fact that this is not going to change the reality, because even as this was being talked about, we still had what happened to Priyanka Reddy in Hyderabad. We still had what happened to Asifa. We still had so many cases that slipped between the cracks because they're not being talked about in as many numbers. So respecting the dignity of the parents and their agency in this, I understand. I completely empathize, I completely understand. But that's not an excuse for a lawmaker or a judiciary to say ki ho gaya, solution ho gaya. They need to work harder.
Fantastic. I think my thoughts echo the both of you. And I really don't think that death penalty is the right way to go. But of course, I can't do much about it. All right. I think we've come to the end of our session, and that's it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Shruti, for joining us. And I know it was really early for you. Thank you. And thank you, Kirthi. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And it's been a pleasure to have you both.
Thank you so much again, Aditi. Thank you, Kirthi, for all the amazing work you're doing. And it was really such a pleasure and honor to be here with everybody.
Likewise, thank you for all the wisdom you shared, Shruti, and for all the work you continue to do.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. See you.
Bye.